Bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am David Barrault. I am the editor-in-chief of Les Echos. I'm replacing a colleague who had to go up to Paris very, very quickly, but don't worry, everything's fine. I have not prepared this round table, but the good thing is that all of the panelists know what we're supposed to be talking about, so that's a good thing. So I have no worries. The theme of our round table is giving a new lease of life to innovation, but I've been advised that we're not going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about artificial intelligence and how it can be a driver for innovation. As you know, we're all facing all kinds of challenges today, whether we're talking about ecology, economics, society. The question is, are we going to settle all of this by negative growth or by frugality? Or do we need a bit of innovation to help us to get over the problems that we're going to have to cope with? So my answer is yes, and we can stop the discussion right there. But let's try and be a bit more in-depth and intelligent than that. So here we've got Bertrand Jacquiat, who's going to give us a couple of words of introduction. He's from the Cercle des Économistes. We've also got Clara Chapaz, who is in charge of the French tech, working for the French government. And she's continuing the work of Fleur Pellerin. Fleur Pellerin today is at the head of a company called Corelia Capital with Korean shareholders. And then next door to Clara, we've got Olivier Girard, who's the president of Accenture. Then we've got Gildas Barrère, who is at the head of Sequence. I think that's the way you pronounce it. It could be Sequins or Séquence. It's a not very well-known company, but they do active principles. They create the initial components of chemical things. Then we've also got a representative of Huawei France, and there we have our whole panel. So let's start, for example, by laying out the landscape. I'll invite Bertrand to say a couple of words about the role of innovation in coping with the challenges that face us. Well, to give a new lease of life to innovation, well, one has already been given. 6 or 7 years ago, there were no unicorns in France, i.e. a business with a turnover over 1 billion euros. But since then, in October 2021, there was a big investment scheme which was launched by Emmanuel Macron. Patricia Parabizet, who is very close to the Cercle des Économistes and who is working in another of the sessions here this morning, he has presented the first conclusions of this investment plan. He presented that to Elizabeth Bourne a few days ago. And over these past 5 or 6 years, where the soil was very fertile for young shoots, but since then there are now tens of young companies that have reached, in France of course, that have reached that benchmark, that billion benchmark. A colleague of mine was talking about this disruptive, historical disruption, which has impacted many sectors in luxury, technology, and is going to do it for the post-carbon economy also. So when I was preparing this session, I asked each of the participants to stress, because innovation, yes, it's a very general topic, but I've asked them all to zoom in on what AI can contribute to innovation. And AI requires a lot of resources in terms of calculations, databases, and talent also to exploit all of these resources. France has plenty of trump cards on this front. It's got strengths in terms of its talents. If you look at the ranking of education, France seems to be going down. However, the engineers seem to be bubbling to the top all over the world, including in Silicon Valley, where you seem to find only French people and Indians. There are financial means Risk Capital is in fifth position for the startup of startups in France, behind the States, China, GB, and India. We have strength in terms of energy, because to get all of this running, you need a lot of energy, and thanks to our nuclear program, France will have energy in the long run, which is not expensive. And of course, there are so many opportunities. Let's take the example of a private-public association in the field of healthcare. The sectors where productivity is increasing the most are health and safety and education, and they're weighing down the progress shows. But in the field of healthcare, we can take advantage of France. And AI will give us huge databases for healthcare. There's Doctolib here in France, and health insurance has been centralized. That's one of the problems here in France, but although now it turns into a strength because it means that we have a huge database to improve our healthcare. So those are the few introductory words that I have chosen to give to this roundtable discussion. Well, thank you for that rather optimistic message. Yes, we do have strengths. So, Clara, French techs, if we look back 10 years ago, we were very optimistic. So given the context today, we know that the ecosystem is under stress, but given the specific nature of AI, to what degree in France, when we look at those giants from the English-speaking world, what kind of room remains for a French ecosystem to ensure that we're not lagging behind as we have been in the first and second generations of internet? Well, optimism is the right word here. I think we have room and the need to create this ecosystem. We are faced with a technological revolution. It's huge in economic terms because most of us, I think, have tried to play around with ChatGPT, and we realize how we can enhance our productivity thanks to that. But here we are facing a huge economic opportunity. Today, we think that artificial intelligence is about 60 billion in terms of the economy, but it'll be 1,300 billion in 3 or 4 years' time. So there's a huge tidal wave opening up for all sectors. So ChatGPT and other productivity tools, but the main usage is in healthcare. We have tools now that can speed up healthcare technologies, and then we've got cars, knowledge, all areas of the economy are impacted. So why am I optimistic? Well, I believe that French tech has been successful over the last decade because, and Fleur will talk about this, I think that's because we have the ingredients for success that we can find in France and in Europe for these new technological evolutions. So there are 3 things. We're going to talk first of all about access to talent, and I'll come back to that, access to funding, supporting and working collectively with the state. And that's what we're aiming for in the French Tech program. We've got a program that I'm going to talk about later on. And there's also a bit of a challenge where we're going to have to speed things up, something which we haven't yet done properly, and that's collaboration between startups and big groups to create all of these opportunities to innovate. So talents to begin with, that's the first chapter. Just as a side story here, the main AI teams and all of the research labs in the States are full of French people. And that speaks volumes. We provide the highest number of AI researchers in Europe. I think about 25% of them are French. The positive thing in this is that we are starting to have a turnaround where those researchers which may have started to do their theses, who in the GAFAM, are coming back to France to work in AI, particularly for generative AI, which is the most interesting in terms of sovereignty. And Arthur Mensch is talked about open AI. We've got Sanders Polu, who's also got a program, and he's already talked about AI. We see there are individuals here who are developing models. They started off in the States, they're coming back now, they get financed here to launch models here in France. And I think that's a real turnaround in the situation. Then the question of funding, private funding. Mr. Alia went to get some funds and got a huge amount of money, but when you know how much it costs to pay for all this calculation with AI, you need a lot of budget, and the budget has to be public. And the President of France has given 1 billion extra euros to be used for these big calculators, because we need more calculation power to develop these models, and private financiers who are keen on innovation. So I think all of the work that has been carried out over the past decade, which gets public money on board. There's a lot of money which is being directed towards disruptive technologies, and there are countries which are supporting huge startups. We've got French funds, which are very attractive. We've got these TIBI funds, which will help startups, and the appeal of international funds as well. We are going to have that financing power, which is absolutely obligatory for these technologies, because it's a long-term project. They're very, very expensive. And it means that we will be able to see giants emerging. So, and now accompanying these startups, we've got some little gems in French Tech 2030. We've got 8 of them working on AI. We know that there'll be 600. There are 600 startups working on AI in France. 80% in specific zones, 20% in more fundamental aspects. 8 of those 600 are being assisted today. We're going to help them to grow, to speed up, to have the best public funding possible, because there are quite a few of them. We need to help them there. And over the past 10 years, we've developed a lot of expertise, and we can place that now at the disposal of the startups. And I'm going to finish with a challenge here, because it will be a good subject of discussion. So we want to connect startups with big groups. We cannot compete with the major players if we don't do something about this. The big groups aren't really joining in the party so far. About 30% of big French groups are using AI, but very few of them have a view on AI models, generative AI models. And so we need that. And if we want to create our own giants, and if we want to have our own sovereignty in this area, well, that gives me a great stepping stone on to the role that artificial intelligence already plays in major groups. Have they taken it on board? Accenture, you address thousands and hundreds of companies around the world, and their millions of employees, so you're at the very heart of this subject. So are the major groups aware? Have they had their moment of that light bulb moment when they realize that AI is so important? And linked to this, you can see a little, or do you note a bit of concern in big groups about AI, and how can we reassure them and get them on board and make sure that they purchase those machines without fearing losing their jobs? Well, thank you very much. Yes, how can big companies, or how are they broaching the subject of AI? I would say there are 3 types of answers, 3 types of transformation. But before that, I want to come back to those difficulties that they have to get into AI. You may already know that these models, the large language models, need to be trained or pre-trained. And that's the most important thing. PT is pre-training. These models have value if they have been pre-trained on a huge amount of data, and that is their main characteristic. There are different drivers, different algorithms and models in the world. One of the key characteristics is the amount of data that was used to train the models. That is the first point that we really have to keep in mind. Second point, if you do not know, and this is one of the hurdles, if you do not know which model your AI has been trained on, you don't know what kind of answers they're going to give. If you've got generic questions, you may be able to do with anything, but if these elements are used for decision-taking in the business, then it's a completely different kettle of fish. You have to know on which environment of data your AI was trained. So that means that businesses have a huge amount of work to carry out before they use these models. They need to train the models because they're going to use more than one model. And data is a new asset. That's what we've been saying for the past 10 years, but people haven't really taken that message on board. It's not an asset in accounting terms, but data has to be an asset and taken care of with governance. It must be audited, quality assessment, etc. It's just the way that you would assess the value of a company. A lot of companies' data is now being taken into consideration. Here we have to understand what it means to create this new category of asset. So if the question is what kind of translations are going to happen driven by generative AI, well, I can see three. The first thing pertains to the entire business. If you look back at the history of technology, if you take a step back, technology has always been focused on the back office, in finance, stocks, we work plants with them. But recently with digital technologies, we've got new apps on our smartphones. But the big difference here is that generative AI can go much further in customer relations, in the interface with clients, in marketing, in content management, creating campaigns, because it can make videos and all kinds of things like that. We can go much further. We can go, and this is perhaps the only tool that enables us to reach this new paradigm, which is very useful commercially for businesses and for clients, and also for frugality. And let me take a sidestep here. We can go into extreme personalization. Generative AI can go very far in personalizing customer relations. And that is a model that a lot of businesses are striving for. So that's the first evolution, back office, including all of the business and its interface with clients. The second subject is, again, the entire business, because in the future, and very, very quickly, we will all have a co-pilot, an assistant in our business life. This is kind of new. We have meetings with clients already where our AI listens to us and writes at the minutes of the meeting, and identify the 8 actions that have to transpire, which you mentioned. And here are the 2 that artificial intelligence, would like to add, given the subjects that I've witnessed. So 100% of your colleagues will have this kind of technology at their disposal. The third point is opposing simple and complex. Over the past 30 years, technology has worked in the back office, and let's recognize that it's also taken care of some more basic tasks. Technology has been working on identifying these repetitive tasks in businesses and leaving what is more tricky to human experts. The difference here is that generative AI can now do those very complicated tasks. And in the past, it wasn't the case. Last week in the insurance world, I saw some models that can understand claims, very tricky claims, complex claims, with all kinds of different complex contracts of insurance, where there's a lot of data. You have to go and check jurisprudence, and in a few hours it can give a decision which many experts would have taken a lot more of time to have come up with. So all of the colleagues will be seeing that line blurring between the simple and the complex. So back office, middle office. Bill Gates has said we are all overestimating the advantages of year 1 of generative AI. We're all underestimating the gains in years 3 and 4 if we have a transformational approach rather than a productive approach, which is a trap we must not fall into. And I believe that today the time has come that there's such disruption in technology that the different leadership functions can be shared out afresh in industry. So just to wrap up, I would say be ready, work hard, think about your data as a new type of asset, and also work with those managers. Where's the data coming from? How confidential is it? Is there a traceability of what you're using? What kind of protection? What kind of rules? What kind of regulations are necessary? The most important thing, to come back to the final question which you mentioned, is this is your colleagues. You have to help all of your colleagues and help them to become an augmented individual. As you've seen in the question, we tend to see jobs which are disappearing over the past 10 years. Since AI, there have been many studies that are showing, and we have to repeat this in all modesty, that there are many jobs that will be destroyed. That's what we've been hearing, but that's not true, because the same causes, same reasons. It's because the adoption rate is never what we imagine. There are prerequisites which are very complex. There's regulation in place, and we have to adapt. And I think we should talk more about augmented jobs rather than jobs that are being destroyed. And I will finish off by saying one of the biggest challenges for us in the 21st century is to succeed that marriage of the individual with this technology today. The word that we're using is user. When you when you have an app, you are a user. I think we need a better word than that, which will better describe that wonderful union between human ingenuity and technology.
Thanks a lot. We will come back to that. Gilda, there are lots of challenges to take up. We have green transition, health-related issues. In France, we have a healthcare system that has managed to collect data so it can be an asset. We have also production, innovation in pharmaceuticals, and the capacity to make these medicines, relocation processes, something that we've touched upon, but we still produce drugs, medicines, and active principles, but maybe not enough. But we will be able to produce more. To what extent generative AI-based innovation, to what extent France will be more productive in the field of healthcare? So this is a question that I want to put to you. So good morning to all of you. Thanks a lot. Why am I part and parcel of this panel? We are in a traditional industry. Manufacturing processes sequence is one of the leading companies in the field of development of active principles, paracetamol, but we also focus on the new molecules that will be instrumental in making the drugs of tomorrow. We have an industrial footprint in France. Why? Because we innovate, and versus our competitors, we have research and development that are buoyant. 350 people out of 3,500 people, 10% of the employees working on innovation, research and development, and they are working in the 10 R&D centers focusing on the traditional activities of traditional industries to improve the performances of the process. We are also working on less traditional innovation to help our customers in order to fast-track the development of the molecules. And I will be talking about the new technologies and how they can be applied to our businesses. So for us, innovation is above all a matter of survival. If we don't innovate, if we produce like the American, Asian competitors in Europe, our role is limited. And if we don't invest, if we fail to innovate, our industry will be doomed to lose market share. So for us, there are two challenges to take up. First, challenge to value our innovations, to make the most of our innovations when we design a new product, a new function. When we design a more competitive process, it is immediate. The consumers will buy it. We have a payback. You have immediate profitability. You can invest money. The shareholders will support us. We can launch some significant investments when it comes to designing these new processes and new functions. When we talk about a more sustainable innovation, there are lots of issues. You may have a process that will reduce the carbon footprint of our processes. It is a swift development. Of course, it is fast, but versus what? It's always difficult to gauge. So we need to value the sustainable benefits of innovation. This is one of the key learnings when it comes to giving a boost to innovation. There were different panel discussions in this room, and we talked about the valuation of environmental footprint as part of the production process. Back to this panel discussion, how a mainstream industry can take on board the disruptive technologies. Over the past 10 years, we've digitalized our businesses. I mean, you know what is a production process. The first step was about the digitalization of our processes. We've invested quite a lot. But what is at stake today is AI. But there are other disruptive technologies coming to the fore, and how a mainstream industry takes on board those challenges. Of course, we have to be at the forefront of an ecosystem that will provide us with these technologies. So in the media, people have been talking about AI. We are a mainstream company with mainstream and traditional processes. But we need integrators such as Accenture. We have people who are close to us, but we need to get the support of Accenture in order to help us optimize our processes. What is important is to focus on the real economy. First challenge. Second challenge now. How can we use and tap those new technologies in order to meet the needs and requirements of our customers and to meet the needs and requirements of the people, citizens? So for us, we need to fast-track the development of processes for new molecules, and in so doing, we need to glean data to characterize the molecules, to tie up the characteristics of the molecules, i.e. we have to work with the customers, to characterize the effect of a molecule on the patients, and we need to tap technologies, AI technologies, and we need to reconcile data, and then we can take some positions, significant positions on those markets, and we can bring processes whereby it's possible to improve the efficacy of our drugs and medicines, valuation of innovation first, and then to make the most of the disruptive technologies in order to apply them to our businesses. But these technological disruptive patterns should be implemented. So Ming Wang, you've been working in France for many years. You speak French fluently. So first a question. So a big Chinese group, why does it need to develop itself in France? In France, you've sold equipment, but you invested in a laboratory, in many startups. You've invested in R&D laboratories. You've invested in production. Is it because we're an innovative country? Why are you enticed and attracted by France? So good morning to all of you. Thank you for putting the question and for raising it. So Huawei is an innovation-driven company, and we've secured a foothold in more than 170 countries and regions. So why in France? What do we do in France? So Huawei has been in France for the past 20 years, and in 2014, we launched the research and development policy in France, 5 research and development centers across different activities. And in 2020, we inaugurated the research center, fundamental research center in France. So I can tell you that we do relate to innovation. We are straddling different activities. So regarding fundamental research, that's important, by the way. Fundamental research has to be linked with innovation. Fundamental basic research is the cornerstone of these innovations. So what about these centers of basic research, fundamental research? So in these centers, we focus on basic fundamental research on mathematics. So we have scientists coming from the world over. They work in France with us, with you, with everybody, in fact. And the upshot of that is that the findings will be shared with the whole scientific community. So this is the cornerstone of innovation, as I said. So we are a telecommunications company, a spare parts manufacturer. So for us, it is of the utmost importance to focus on these new technologies. So we are talking about 5G for mobile technologies. Through innovations, we can make strides with different technologies, mathematics. So that's why we created those centers. So if you consider Huawei and Huawei's strategy, we invest a lot in research, resources, and development. Over the past 10 years, we've invested $140 billion. Last year, we've broken a record. More than 25% of our revenues being invested in research and development. Question, there's a kind of rift, there's a kind of technological divide. The world was very globalized with innovations being shared, but the world is being split up with the Western bloc and the Chinese bloc in the field of innovation. Is why we're confident in the ability of the Chinese ecosystem to work with others and to be a performing ecosystem in the field of artificial intelligence. Do you think that you are still in the race and you can remain in the race? So, as far as we're concerned, we're talking about a split up, a kind of decoupling pattern. But as I said earlier, since 2014, we've been investing in France, in Europe. We have 23 research and development centers in Europe. So we create 15,000 direct jobs and 220,000 indirect jobs. So we create jobs. So it's an ecosystem. I wouldn't say that this ecosystem is a global one, but there's a high technological strategy when we innovate in 5G. There are very few people who know that at Huawei in France, we have a development and mathematics center bringing together 80 researchers working on the different algorithms of 5G, and they cooperate with a Chinese team. So it's a collective endeavor. I mean, we are not fending for ourselves. There is no such thing as China in the one hand and Europe on the other. So we've been investing in France, in Europe, in China, but you are aware of the current situation. It is what it is. But we endeavor to work with everybody in order to maintain this ecosystem. You talked about startups earlier. So you touched upon the unicorns and bicorns, and Huawei has been supporting a digital impulse program. We list 100 startups. We don't invest in those startups, but we provide support to them in order to make a link between the French ecosystem and the ecosystems in China, in Shanghai, in Shenzhen. So you have Huawei, but there are other technological companies working in a collaborative manner. Of course, I hope that we won't reach a kind of extreme situation. We don't want to backtrack because it wouldn't be good. So my phone is ringing. I mean, that's those people, I mean, who don't turn off, I mean, their phones. It may be somebody from Amazon is delivering a product to me. No, Fleur. So before we cast a future-oriented eye, let us talk about the past. So when you were in charge of the startups at the Ministry of Economy, you were tasked with managing the French tech at that time. So can you take stock of the situation? What is your take on that? when you look at the achievements, when you look back into the mirror, maybe you could say that we could have done things differently. Good morning to all of you. So I had a roadmap. I designed my roadmap, had a lot of leeway when it came to designing my blueprint. So you have invention, R&D, and innovation. So you need to be more precise, more specific with those two concepts. An invention is a creation of the human mind, but it won't lead necessarily to an innovation, i.e. with a market, i.e. a new product or an incremental improvement of a product. The difference between innovation and invention. Innovation means that you market a product that will meet a need, a requirement, targeting specific people. So when I was tasked with managing the digital economy, I looked at different ecosystems, a source of inspiration, Israel and Silicon Valley. So you cannot replicate these ecosystems because they are the result of some specific circumstances that can't be applied with a simple recipe. But these examples were a source of inspiration. So in France, we had lots of ingredients whereby we could create a system supporting innovative performance, but these ingredients were not bound together, so I had to come up with a recipe. So the state, governments, the administration in the field of innovation, in the field of modernity, they are lagging behind. I don't want to level any criticism at someone, but when you deal with an administration, when you deal with a tedious bureaucracy, it's very difficult to be in sync with the pace of innovation. So it's very difficult to launch some regulations, and then you don't know which incentive systems will perform. So you don't want to have a kind of research that is administered and that can't lead to good results. Some errors were made. From time to time, people think that the government knows better, that the administration knows better, and some public funding is being allotted to some specific stakeholders. It's a bit complex. It might work, but there is no guarantee of success, and I don't think that the state is well placed to know who are the right and relevant players. The European and French strategies are a good example, especially for the cloud. So we bet on stakeholders who haven't proved their worth. Remember, we wanted to create a European Google, but there were no results. In terms of generative AI, you don't have a company that rules the roost, but there are some initiatives that will enable to put France and Europe in the race. So we can change the situation, but when we said that we would create a European Google, it was already too late. So an approach that is too administrative or too administration-driven, and from time to time, government and administrations are self-complacent or are complacent. The Americans, they used subsidies in order to fund DARPA, but the government did not make any technological choice. And regarding the creation of the French tech, for me, if you create a system that is propitious to innovation, it was a matter of creating a regulatory system in order to boost innovation, the funding of innovation. So it's a matter of changing the mindset. It's not easy because in terms of culture, this is not something that you can state. It was a matter of changing the mindsets. It was a matter of rousing the will of young people to create startups in the field of of algorithms, in the field of mathematics. So there were lots of ingredients, not a single ingredient. So there were lots of ingredients that were necessary. Regarding the regulatory front, we talked about research and development, innovation. We created an innovation tax credit. We had the research tax credit system in order to attract many companies. I think that Huawei has used this system. It's a powerful system in order to relocate grey matter in France. So with my team, we said, why not extend it to innovation, even though it's a concept that is much more difficult to define from a regulatory viewpoint. So we made a decision. We wanted innovative SMEs to get this tax credit in order to dwindle marketing expenses of an innovative product that will provide some benefits to the users, a product that is more eco-responsible.
And so that requires a regulatory background. You need tax incentives for entrepreneurs who've cashed out, for example, and are going to invest in real estate rather than a startup. These are mechanisms that means that we can orient finance to innovation. So all of these components were regulatory, and I think it was really interesting that we could create an environment that would foster an entrepreneurial mindset. And that, at the time, well, we had a few unicorns. There was BlaBlaCar. There were also some in the telecom sector. But the number, I think there are 25 unicorns today. I think the seed has been sown. The seed was sown back then, and the ecosystem has been taking its time to come to fruition. But what we started back then, in 2010, etc., it's come to fruition today, and we've got a new French innovation system which is prospering now. And in the future, I think we're going to have a lot more success stories, particularly in AI and regenerative AI. Sorry, I've only just mentioned that term now, generative AI. I think there's not one clear winner today. I think the first to reach the finishing line will have a dominant place in the market. So I think now is the time really to jostle position in the private and the public sector so that we have powerful players in this field. Let's say a couple of words about AI. So the fund which you're representing has invested heavily in France. Are you here to invest in which sectors? In the sector of AI? Is that where you're going to put your money? Or is that a bit too risky for you because the Americans are streets ahead of us? Well, it depends what we're talking about. I've got one fund which is a late-stage investor, companies which are quite mature, which have turnover, which are almost at the profitability point. This is an area which we have studied. It's not really an area, if you like. It's very transversal. And there was Mistral is a company which hadn't even registered yet, but that kind of thing is unthinkable for us, and I regret that it was an American fund that got there first. And the ABP is also present in that ecosystem. There are very few French or European funds in a position to play the game at that level. It's great that it can exist. My fund, it was beyond our budget by far. But yes, of course, we take a very, very close look at all of these opportunities because they are going to be scattered throughout all sectors, and you have to take up a position here or there. So we've got 10 or so minutes left. Perhaps it's time for questions. I've got a general question. We haven't really talked about regulation. In Europe, we often say that we start by regulating before you actually innovate. Are you rather concerned about that discussion about the regulation of AI when you compare to the United States? Olivier, you've put your papers on the table. Do you want to pick up the microphone? Well, I believe that regulation is recognized by the consumer, and the Americans have taken inspiration from our GDPR. We are not going to change our nature, but tech has to be responsible, and responsibility includes regulations. And the example of positive GDPR is useful because I really do believe that it's an opportunity to stand out from the crowd. Clearer perhaps now? Well, yes, there's a lot of work carried out on AI, and it adopts these dynamics which we've been talking about, i.e., and what Fleur was talking about, in order to line up all of the planets in this ecosystem. You have to work together. That's been done very well over the past 10 years. And it's important to understand regulations. So let's think about this at the outset and not halfway down the road, as we can see is happening in the United States. That could be one of our strengths. We have to do it in a way that will not slow innovation down. And we've got Jean-Noël Barrot in our government, who's very dynamic here, wanting to work together, being as close as possible to startups, ecosystems, understanding their needs, and understanding the risks that regulation could pose to their progress in Europe. Gildas. Yeah, in terms of healthcare, we need a lot of regulations because we want medication to be absolutely safe, and they're supposed to treat, not kill. And regulation can be seen as a hurdle, but no, it's absolutely essential. The thing is, how in our innovation projects do we take stock of regulations? Because it has a purpose. The goal there is for your medication to be safe in healthcare. Well, as far as technology is concerned, when you take a look over your shoulder over the past 10 years and how technology has evolved, it's been very, very quick. I believe that, of course, we need to regulate, but we need the proper regulations. You talked earlier on about China and what's going on over there. I believe that regulation should not slow down the dynamics of innovation. It really is important. That's my first point. My second point is that regulation has to be able to keep up with technological evolutions so that it is efficient. So it isn't a hurdle. That's really impossible. Fleur, regulation. This is a very administrative country here, France. Are we going to want to throw all kinds of laws out there? Well, it's quite likely. But I think we could approach things in a different way. The perfect situation would be to have a smart regulation approach. An example is participative funding, for example, which was underdeveloped in France back at the day when I was in position. And there was a lack of regulation that meant that that activity would not prosper because crowdfunding is loans are usually the remit of banks, but here we were trying to get other organizations than banks to be involved. So when we had regulation on crowdfunding in 2013, well, the French businesses were then starting to develop their activities. So this is a very typical example. We've got regulation that can stimulate activity. But in health, I'm not a specialist in healthcare, but I do often meet people who say that the product launch process here in France and in Europe is much lengthier than the United States, perhaps because we're more cautious, but perhaps also because for reasons that could be re-examined. These processes could guarantee safety and the good health of the users, but at the same token, we could speed up the pace of releasing molecules onto the market here in France. So yes, regulation or constraints can handicap our French players, and that is a subject which we really have to pay great attention to because we have tendency to kind of go deeper and deeper into regulations, and once you've done that, you lose all flexibility and all agility. Yes, regulation can be an opportunity. GDPR was very hazy to begin with. Is it positive or negative for European players? Question mark. And there are some regulations which can protect the consumer, and they can be competitive edge. And as for generative AI, there are going to be many challenges ahead in terms of intellectual property ownership and private data. There's going to be a lot of challenges ahead. I'm not leaving. I'm simply going to point my finger at the person who's got the right to ask a question. Please wait for the microphone. Hello, I'm Philippe Cass. I work in Silicon Valley, and I help the European ecosystem to set up in the States. My question pertains to access to data, and as Olivier was saying, it's very, very important. We need data right now to generate these models, which are going to generate value in 2 or 3 or 4 years' time. So today in France, how can we make it possible to have access to data created by the state, or data that is created by businesses, to enable these models to be trained up right now? So is data available now? Olivier? Well, we're thinking all that through right now. The government is starting to make more data about the French population and businesses. More of that data is becoming available. So we're making as much as possible because we realize how valuable that data is. It is a work in progress. We are working on it right now. Often I hear people saying that in the field of healthcare, we've got huge competitive edge because we have got this centralized healthcare system. We've got a homogeneous database which can be used, but how are we going to use it? Gildas, have you got anything to say about that? We're at the very beginning of that. This digital healthcare platform will cover the entire French population. All the data will be anonymous. We've got 9 million French people are on the system already for general data and specific data. And we have to succeed that. And everybody has to find a value in that. Businesses who are going to use the data to carry out research, they are finding it very valuable. So this is really a pivotal point. The data is starting to come through. We can work on it because it's all anonymous and protected, but our economic added value really has to help us to change up a gear. So we see data coming to the fore. We see more clients starting to develop personalized molecules, and they are asking us to produce very small quantities that correspond to a certain profile of client. We're only at the very beginning of this, but today action is taking place in the States more than in Europe. And in the States, they have a capacity very quickly to transform an innovation into an industrial phenomenon. We've got time for one question, but it really has to be very short, otherwise we won't have time for the answer. Camilo Conquadi, I'm part of the youth project headed by the Cercle des Économies. I want to talk about the moratorium on AI. You've talked about research. So I'd like to know your opinion on this moratorium that was recently requested. So do we need to press the pause button? I can answer. There's one thing which is interesting, but it's a comment more than anything else. In semiconductors, we're saying that every 18 months, at constant price, the calculating power would double. For the very first time in the software world with ChatGPT, when you move between version 3 to version 4, the step is absolutely huge. We are talking about disruptive innovation, and people are getting worried because the impact that we're going to suffer or enjoy, you can pick your verb, it's going to destroy some, because for the very first time it's going to be impacting white-collar jobs, for example. And that is a bit of a cause concern. The second thing is that with VivaTech there were 2 roundtables, one with Elon Musk saying for the very first time in the history of humanity, we are going to be faced with tools that are going to be more intelligent than man. Man is the ruler of the planet now because it's the most intelligent being, but in the future there are going to be machines that are more intelligent than us, so that is a cause for concern. You've got Facebook and Meta saying that we are, what people want to ban us or slow us down, but that's ridiculous. It's if you want to ban the aircraft before really inventing it. So the day that we do manage to create these fast machines, we will have brakes on them, so let's not be too worried about that. And to wrap up, a word of conclusion, let's hand the floor back to Bertrand. are economists. So the speakers at this round table echo what Bruno Le Maire was saying yesterday. He really did place the accent on how important it is to have knowledge, science, progress, and I think everybody has echoed those words. My second remark is that perhaps here in French history, we're in a phase of entrepreneurial, innovative capitalism. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the discussions at this event.